every time I start to talk about this kind of AI's impact on our own minds, AI's impact on our jobs, AI's impact on the skills required to create human value in the
Yep.
workplace. It's a massive issue, massive challenges. And I feel like the train is moving much more quickly down the tracks than we are thinking down the tracks.
I think that's true. And I think if there's one thing that I'm maybe optimistic about, it's that we do have the capability now to better understand human capabilities. We can think about skills, we can measure skills, we can think about work to be done in different ways. All of the things that we said have been blind spots for a lot of organizations for a long time. We're starting to recognize that they're blind spots.
It's potentially profoundly debilitating if I'm a young person and I've not had to think hard.
Yeah.
But then there aren't a lot of jobs available that require me to think hard. Or the only jobs that are available are the ones that do require me to think hard. But
and then how do I get there? How do I learn how to think hard if I'm not challenged all along the way?
Yeah.
And I think that is what I am most nervous about. It is the thing that, I mean, being in this line of work and talking about future of work and skill development, and me very much focusing on the human side of the workforce.
Yeah.
And me also seeing, inevitably, because I love technology and I love what it can do for us, inevitably seeing a future in which we drive ourselves off a cliff.
Welcome to Leadership Disrupted. Koreen Pagano has built her career helping organizations and people transform. For over 25 years, she's been shepherding digital transformations, immersive technologies, data solutions, AI transitions. She's launched new products. She's entered new markets. She's built business strategies. She's pitched new ventures to boards. And she's helped dozens of organizations navigate their journey to becoming a skills-based organization, which I have a lot of questions about, because skills-based is kind of one of the new buzzwords, buzz terms that I think a lot of people are using, but not many people understand it the way that Koreen understands it. She's a globally recognized speaker, author of 2 books. The first one was Immersive Learning, and the latest one is called Building the Skills-Based Organization. And she's with us here today. I'm very excited for this conversation. So, Koreen, welcome. And let me ask you, are there any gaps that you would want to fill in terms of just initially letting people know who you are and what you do?
I mean, listening to your introduction of me made me very impressed with myself. Thanks, Dan. That was lovely. That was lovely. No, I think, if anything, probably some context that a lot of my work experience has been in product leadership. And so a lot of the way I look at the world is through more of a product lens, and experimentation and innovation, and thinking what that looks like. And that I have been at I don't even know what the front line of trying out new tech. Mm-hmm. I was going to say the bleeding edge, but that sounded like such a buzzword. I hated that. So,
well, and I think, when you're in the learning and development space from a product standpoint, there's so many ways in which it's different than being the internal employee responsible for learning and development. Because as an internal employee, you have a variety of customers, but it's primarily one learner persona or a narrow learner persona. When you move on to creating product for a market, you need to understand your customer, your learners, and you need to build for a wider aperture, so to speak, and that's challenging. How do you widen the aperture so that you are uh, expanding the market, and then at the same time make the learning relevant enough that people will want to pay for that learning, as opposed to I worked for GE for about a decade, and we developed a lot of great training, but nobody at GE had to individually pay for anything that we developed. GE just funded the budget. So I don't want to say that quality bar is lower, but I will acknowledge it's easier. There's less pressure on one's shoulders.
Certainly less risk, I think.
Yeah.
You're building internally versus building a product that you're hoping people will pay for. It puts a level of value there on really, really getting it right and testing it and iterating and making sure that you're meeting folks' needs. So, yeah.
So as I went through your career on LinkedIn, I was impressed with the depth of experience in lots of different areas. A couple things like jumped out at me that I'm just personally curious about. And if you can tell me to mind my own business, you can say, I don't want to talk about that. But let's talk about lynda.com, because you worked for lynda.com, you developed product for lynda.com. I remember the days of lynda.com. And I remember meeting someone who worked for lynda.com, and they were very proud of the company. They very much felt like, hey, we're a small band of merry entrepreneurs. We all work hard and we're proud of what we're creating. And then at some point, lynda.com was acquired by LinkedIn. And I was just always curious. I wondered what that looked like or how that felt, because eventually then lynda.com became LinkedIn Learning. And then I'm sure LinkedIn Learning expanded with lots more and more, products, learning products. But what was that like? I guess, or let me not just assume anything. What was that experience working within Lynda and then being acquired by LinkedIn?
So when I joined lynda.com, it was really my first product role. I had sold my company. My company had been acquired, and I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do next. And one of the companies that reached out to me was Lynda, and they were looking for someone to help drive the B2B side of the platform, because they up to that point had been mainly consumer focused. And so I joined at a time where they were starting to understand the value of organizational learning, but they didn't really have that in their DNA. And I had only been working with learning in organizations, so it was a really good fit for me to come in and bring that perspective of what is it like to serve the needs of organizational learning and really think about those mechanisms. I was fortunate in that after about a year, I started leading that B2B side of product. And I don't know who you knew within Lynda at the time, but I will say what you describe is true. I was incredibly proud of the work that we were doing. I learned as much as I knew about learning before I worked at Lynda. I really learned about product and scale and thinking about the balance of user experience and content, and just worked with an incredible, talented organization. We used to, when we would be at events or conferences, people would walk by us and just yell out, "I love lynda.com."
Yes.
There's really not another company I've ever worked for that had that kind of following and had that kind of widespread admiration for the work that we were doing. So it was fantastic. It was a great experience. I could write a whole book on everything I learned in my years there, but I was also there through the LinkedIn acquisition.
And no disrespect toward LinkedIn, but you generally don't at trade shows see people walking by the LinkedIn booth going, "I love LinkedIn, yay LinkedIn!" No. I like LinkedIn. It's just it's not the same. There was a definite emotional element to it. So what was that transition like for the employees?
So I was on the product side. So a couple things I will say. We as an organization had an inkling that something was going to change. Linda herself, Linda Wyman, had started to transition out of day-to-day. When I started at Linda, I met with Linda and her husband, Bruce, to review every feature that we were launching. She was very involved in the business. And over the years I was there, as we were growing and scaling, she started, I think, to rethink her role in the organization and was less involved in kind of the day-to-day. And that, I think, was a signal to all of us that things were starting to shift. And then we started to see changes at the C-level organizational structure. And so we were like, okay, what does this mean for all of us? So I won't say that we were dramatically surprised when it was announced that LinkedIn acquired us, and I think we were all very happy. I will also say, to LinkedIn's credit, they treated us amazingly. I think often when there's an acquiring company and a company being acquired, that it creates a weird dynamic. I don't think we felt that at all. We definitely felt like they were excited for us to join, that they valued our expertise and what we had built. And so there was, and the first person I met from LinkedIn was Ryan Roslansky, who was CPO at the time. And they came down from San Francisco down to Carpinteria, where Linda is and was, and met with all of us and asked for our feedback and input. So we had a big barbecue. I have a sweatshirt that still says LinkedIn+Linda.com. Like it was very welcoming, and I think culturally they recognized how invested we all were in the success of Linda and wanted that to carry over into our work at LinkedIn.
And at the time, Reid Hoffman was still the CEO at the time?
No, Jeff Weiner was the CEO.
Oh,
so
okay.
we met him as well, but I just got to hang out with Ryan because
and Ryan is now the CEO.
Ryan is now the CEO and has transitioned into having a leadership role at Microsoft as well. So Ryan has obviously very much expanded his role. So I always like to tell everyone that Ryan was the first person I met from LinkedIn, because that carries some weight.
Yeah, for sure. So then in that experience, one of the reasons I was excited about this conversation is you're someone who has definitely lived in the world of work. When I've had interviews with high-level CEOs or other quote visionaries, I don't mind them. They're always interesting, but I think sometimes when you're at that level, the air is so thin, you have kind of a pristine view of how things are. Whereas when you are in the trenches, like me, like you, we see this real world of work, and we see humans are messy. Humans, they're sometimes cooperative and they're sometimes competitive, and sometimes you don't know which is which. They aren't always as organized, as capable as one would hope that they are. Again, humans are messy, and so human work can sometimes be quite messy, especially when you're trying to move fast, you're trying to make something new happen. So my question is, are there any major leadership lessons you've learned along the way that you would, I don't know, provide guidance to any leader today who's trying to lead a human organization going forward? Just anything, top of mind that bubbles up for you?
Yeah. I mean, I've worked with some incredible leaders, and I've worked with some folks that I wouldn't choose to work with again. And I've learned a lot about my own leadership style and what my values are. I think one lesson I learned from LinkedIn, just speaking of that transition, is that as a leader at Linda, moving into a bigger organization that was kind of focused on connecting people with jobs and looking at a broad societal problem to solve, the the thing that was so interesting to me was some of the first conversations I had with folks from LinkedIn was, what do you want? They call it your next move or your next play. They would ask immediately, what do you want your next job to be? Because their whole ethos was around, you'll probably stay in your role 2 to 3 years, and then you're going to move on to something different. And my job as your manager and leader is to help you prepare for what's next. Maybe that will be within our organization, and that would be great. But maybe you'll leave and go to another organization. And no matter where you go, my job as your leader is to help you develop and grow. And that was incredibly different than a lot of organizations.
I was just going to say, I think that is so refreshing and unusual to hear. And I do think that's part of going forward, effectively leading particularly younger generations. The conversation alone, the question alone has value. And then, of course, having that conversation and potentially helping. That's fantastic.
It allowed, from right out of the gate, a manager and their employee to have a conversation about career progression, and in a way that took away the, you're going to stay on my team forever. My whole goal is to suck as much out of you as I can. Right? Like, it was much more of a, I'm going to recognize, and we're going to have a conversation up front, that this isn't going to be the end of your career. This is a step in your career. And my job is to help you get to the next rung of whatever the ladder is for you, whatever that looks like, and to have real conversations. And that I have really taken to heart and incorporated. I was so blown away that a company of that size at the time had that as part of its culture and its ethos. But they really practice what they preach, right? Like, they really were like, we understand how people's careers and trajectory is, and we are going to build that into how we treat our people. So that's been a really important lesson for me to learn pretty early in my career, and has informed a lot of how I work with others.
I can't say that it was a universal part of the GE ethos, but I do remember what it felt like the first time I had a GE performance review, annual performance review, and my direct supervisor led with exactly that. Yeah. Where do you want this to take you? And we had that conversation, which I wasn't well prepared for because I wasn't expecting it. And then at a certain point, she followed up and she said, "So you've been here about 6 or 8 months. How are we doing for you? And specifically, how am I doing for you?" And again, she turned it into a mutual performance review. And being new, I wasn't really ready to answer that question well, but you get into the second and third year, and then we had very rich, meaningful conversations about exactly that. But I have to say, what's more common, and I know you know this, what's more common is the manager to be thinking, consciously or not, well, I've already invested 2.5 years in you. I do not want you leaving. I don't want you leaving internally. I don't want you leaving externally. I've even literally had managers say, I only want to invest in training that they can apply in their existing role today. I'm not training them to be something else or to want to go somewhere else. One very specifically said, I'm not even inviting this particular person to this leadership training because I'm concerned that if I do, she will interpret that to mean she's being prepared for something better or something more. And I said, well, have you thought about having that conversation with her to just tell her that hey, we're wanting to develop you, but there's not anything like near term that's going to be happening with you. And this person said, well, I can't say that because then she'll leave. I said, oh, so you're in this zone where you don't want to create an expectation. But the reality is she's just going to stay in this box for as long as she can. But you don't want to say that. So I said,
That's
just so
so
we're
disheartening.
clear, and that's one of the joys of selling training services, and you're trying to figure out with a client, what are they looking to accomplish, and this particular client had a very narrow band of what she was looking to accomplish. She was looking to check a box to be able to say,
Yeah.
I've delivered leadership development training this quarter to this group of people, but she was not really looking for anything beyond that in terms of actual growth or impact. So with that said, one of the terms that has been gaining traction the last couple of years is skills-based development, skills-based organizations, skills-based leadership, even skills-based training. And I'll be honest with you, Koreen. When I first began hearing about it, it sounded like, okay, this is the same stuff, but in different packaging. This is sort of a new language for HR folks to get excited about, or a new language for training vendors to sell consulting. I didn't really get, in fact, I know and if you are one of those vendors listening and you and I had this conversation, can I apologize? Because I know I was somewhat abrasive to a couple of you who wanted to talk to me as a consultant about, uh, you know, transitioning toward a skills-based organization. And I know I said to at least one of you, well, isn't that what we are? If we're not helping people develop skills, what is a training department doing? And I could have been more gracious. So I apologize for that. But let me ask you,
Yeah.
you've written a book. You've obviously spent a lot of time thinking about this. Let me start with the basics. What is a skills-based organization, or what is skills-based thinking? However you want to answer it.
Yeah. I think I spend a lot of time thinking about what is a skill, and why would we even come up with this new word, which is part of the reason why I wrote this book, is to start to answer even very basic questions like that, based on having worked now with hundreds of organizations who are grappling with and trying to figure this out. Like, what does this mean? And I'm going to answer this in maybe a roundabout way. Back in 2018, I was asked by the company I was working with, D2L, to start really doing a better investigation of the intersection of higher ed and employers. That what they were hearing from employers, and I was on the corporate side of the business there, and helping them build out that strategy, that employers were saying new hires, new students who are graduating and coming to our workforce aren't ready for the jobs to be done.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're having to spend all this time, the employers are spending time getting new hires up to speed to be able to be productive in the workforce. And in that business, we worked a lot with higher ed institutions, and the higher ed institutions were like, we've created all of these competency-based education models, and the goal is to prepare our students for the workforce. And so the executive team came to me and said, can you figure out what's going on? Like, why is there such a disconnect? If higher ed is saying we're creating this whole system to better meet the needs of employers, and employers are like, you're getting worse at this.
Yeah.
And so I spent a year. I was still helping run the strategy for the corporate side of the business, but I got together a small team and we started doing research, and we started talking to higher ed institutions and employers and programs that were looking at the intersection of education and workforce, and really trying to figure out what's going on. And higher ed was talking about competencies and their competency models, and employers were asking for skills. And I was like, okay, is this a translation problem? Are we talking about the same thing? Like, what's the disconnect?
Well, let's take an example.
Yeah.
One very common, frequently used competency would be emotional intelligence,
Yeah.
which is it's the more you learn about emotional intelligence, it's such a broad term. So help us understand the distinction between emotional intelligence as a competency and how you might think about that in a skills-based mind.
So my very basic definition of a skill is a thing that you can do that can be measured. And in the workplace, it's often tied to a task. So I can complete this task, I can do this thing, and I can measure that I did this thing successfully. Emotional intelligence is not really you could argue maybe it's a thing you can do. And yes, it can be measured. There are tools that try to or give some insight into emotional intelligence. But in the context of work, it's very hard to measure emotional intelligence, and it's not really tied on its own to a task. So it is more of a capability, a human capability of being emotionally intelligent. But
So
it is
I might have picked a bad example. However, let me just say, and this is maybe because of my own, well, I will say I do think of emotional intelligence as a set of skills, like the skill of reading others accurately, the skill of listening, the skill of asking follow-up questions to show someone that you've been listening to them.
Yeah.
But now that may be the reason I think of it as a set of skills is because it never came naturally to me. So for me, emotional intelligence is truly a learned set of skills that I had to practice a long time before they started to feel natural. But if I'm tracking with you, if I were to think of emotional intelligence as a competency, yeah, it's a whole set of capabilities that you can talk about for days and still not develop. But if someone says one specific skill would be asking follow-up questions where you listen to the other person and you ping off of something that they've said to ask a follow-up question to drill deeper and then deeper. And that's a learned skill that is in and of itself, it's not emotional intelligence, but it's a contributor to emotional intelligence. But I've never really thought it through to say, well, what are all of the skills that are required to exhibit emotional intelligence? So maybe I chose a bad example.
That's okay, because I think I think that there are a lot of challenges in trying to measure human capabilities, that we are really complex, and how we engage with the world has a lot of different layers to it. I actually break skills down into 3 categories of human skills, job skills, which are related to the context that you're applying it, and technical skills of like, can I use this tool? Or can I engage with this machine or use this piece of software? Those are useful categories of starting to organize, like, can I use Microsoft Word versus do I know how to create a marketing campaign versus am I emotionally intelligent, which to your point is probably a cluster of skills or an aggregate of skills. But one of the things that I found as we started to work with organizations is that a lot of organizations call leadership a skill. And I hope you're cringing right now when you hear that, because
I'm not cringing. I'm smiling. I'm smiling, maybe with a little smirk, but I'm smiling. Yes.
We're seeing the same challenge with AI, in that people are talking about AI as if it's a skill. And the reality is leadership is comprised of all, like, more leadership skills than you could like probably categorize. And I know lots of folks have tried to categorize them, but and get specific to give people guidance about how to focus their development. But leadership as a skill is a shorthand for a lot of executives to say we need to develop leadership skills in our organization. And they look at it as kind of a category. But for practitioners, back down to like folks who are in the weeds trying to do this thing, leadership is not a single skill. Leadership is an aggregate of mindset and skill and capabilities and all of the things that we're talking about, right?
And in my work, at least once a week, I have a client who has developed their own leadership competency model for their organization. And it may be 20 competencies, it may be 15. I just saw one yesterday with over 30 competencies, all clearly, thought through, but generally there'll be emotional intelligence will appear as one of those competencies, as will strategic thinking. But strategic thinking as a competency, okay, that's great. But there's so much underneath that. There's so much that contributes to the ability to think strategically. And I imagine that's where you get the skills.
Yeah. I mean, that becomes like, as I'm working with organizations around skills, the challenge I always push back on is, how would you measure this? And if they can answer that question, then count it as a skill. I'm not a skills purist. I don't have a, like, you can do this and you can't do that. I do think that organizations have defined skills in lots of different ways and at different levels of specificity. It's kind of I hate to say this as a person who wrote a book called Building the Skills-Based Organization. It's in some way a kind of vague concept that different organizations have interpreted in different ways, but it is really tied to that idea of, can I do this? Can I do this thing? Whatever the thing is.
Can I do this, and can it be measured? Or I guess
can it be measured?
Yeah.
Yeah. Can it be measured? So that's my foundational model. Now, to answer your what is a skills-based organization, which was your original kind of question for me, the way that I don't think I have yet seen an organization that is 100% fully integrated, skills data informed based. There's one example in my book of an organization who organically started this way. It's EPAM. And when I started writing the book, I had a panic moment where I was like, I have no North Star. There's no organization that I can point to say, this is what it could look like. But EPAM's probably as close as I've seen. And most organizations, 99.9% of organizations did not start out as skills-based. And so now they're trying to figure out, well, what is this thing? And the reality is, being skills-based means that you have more data about the capabilities of your people and can match that to the work to be done. So in this equation, there's the skills that people have. There's the skills that are required to do the work of the company, whatever that work is. And obviously every company is different. And then for L&D folks, and this is where I have a triangle, there's the skills that are mapped to content or experiences or practice. And so for us, as I work with L&D folks specifically about building skills and developing skills, it's, do you know what skills someone has and where their baseline is, where they're starting from? Do you know the skills that are needed, whether that's current state or future state, like where do they want to go aspirationally or what's needed in the future? And how does your learning content and experience map to skills so that you can say, based on this person who has this skill at this capability level and has a gap based on the work they want to do in the future, what is the content or experience I can recommend that'll help them practice and develop that skill? So skills-based organization, I'll take one more step back. A skills-based organization is an organization that uses skill data to help inform people-related decisions.
So does a skills-based organization eliminate job titles?
No, not necessarily. Although I think one of the things that's happening in the world right now is that organizations are grappling with, what work will AI do? And then therefore, what work will people do?
Yeah.
And so we're no longer just talking about a human workforce. We're talking about a human and AI integrated workforce. And so for organizations that don't have any visibility into the skills that their people have, it's kind of easy to make some broad sweeping, like, hey, AI can replace these folks. In my experience, I have not yet seen a job that can be 100% replaced. I don't think AI is sophisticated enough, I'll say, yet. Maybe it will be, maybe it will never be, to replace humans in jobs. However, I do think that understanding what AI is good at can help you understand what skills that people will need to better work with AI in that collaboration environment. And so getting back to jobs and job titles and do we need jobs anymore? I think we're in this weird space where a lot of organizations have built a lot of infrastructure around job architecture. And jobs are changing dramatically because of the opportunity for AI to automate different processes or rethink how we work. In that model, the old systems and hierarchies and ways that we used to think about job structures are starting to really be strained and challenged. And I think some companies have experimented with moving away from strict job architectures and thinking more about groups of skills and mapping people together that have complementary skills to accomplish a goal, project-based teams, consulting organizations that are going in and are looking for expertise and skills in complementary areas. They're all starting to move away from strict job titles and coming up with more generic categories of roles of the types of work to be done. Does that mean I think jobs will go away? Probably not. I think we like systems and jobs are a familiar system, but I do think a lot of our data structures that have tied internally in HRISs and HCMs and LMSs that have tied jobs to content, jobs to pay scales, jobs to benefits are going to really strain. And that starting to think about skills as a not tied to job entity, probably a better place to start.
Well, so the part that is compelling for me is the idea of assessing or observing the work that someone is actually doing and the skills that are involved in that work and doing it thoroughly enough where you can, in fact, architect that job through a skills prism. But, and I could be wrong about this, but I get this, my experience seems to be that there's an understanding. There's not a deep understanding of how much effort that is going to require. That analyzing someone's actual work and the skills that drive value in that work, it's more than just answering a questionnaire. It's more than just observing them for half a day. It's more than just in your mind thinking through, okay, what are all the things that they need to be able to do? It's a lot to be able to truly assess the skill set that drives that particular job. And maybe it's just that I haven't been exposed to anybody doing it thoroughly. I've been underwhelmed by the amount of depth of thinking when it comes to actually assessing the skills required for a job. But I do like the idea. I like the idea of a bundle of skills and then helping any employee think of themselves as this set of skills in your current role, but you also have this set of skills currently, and there's this aspirational set of skills we'd like to help you learn to prepare you for either a future role internally or a future role externally, or just help you do this particular role even more effectively.
I have to say, as you described that analysis of work to be done, I think that's an effort in crazy making.
Okay.
I think by the time we would map that all out, it would have already changed, and it wouldn't be consistent.
So then, how do you do it? What do you like? What is the work to be done?
Yeah, I think so. There's a couple kind of organizational challenges that we face right now and to meet this moment. One is that HR and L&D folks are typically too far away from the actual work being done on a daily basis to be able to answer any of those questions.
Man, you're so right. And I love two things about what you just said, Koreen. Number one, I love that you said what you just said, Dan, is crazy making. I love that. You aren't the first, so thank you for that. And then acknowledging that this is not work that's going to happen from somebody in HR sitting in their office. It's going to happen closer to the actual work. I imagine. I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I think thinking about this as like a centralized initiative that's going to happen is not realistic. It won't be able to move as fast. It'll do the same. It'll have the same fate as competency models had in the early 2000s, where people invested millions of dollars and years to build out a competency model and then tried to roll it out, and everything had changed. And now things are changing exponentially faster.
Mhm.
There's never going to be 100% accurate system or record of the work to be done. And there's never, because we'll be modifying it as we go. And there's never going to be 100% accurate picture of the skills in an organization or the skills that an individual has. We're going to do our best to directionally be right and as accurate as possible. One thing I talk about a lot is that the level of specificity you need for some of these decisions depends on the decision you're going to make. So if you are making decisions about strategic workforce planning, or you're looking at where should I be investing L&D dollars, you're looking at high level data across an organization or a group of folks. And so you don't need to know, like, does Koreen have this skill at a level 3 proficiency? You don't need that level. You need to know, like, in general, do we have enough expertise in our organization in this area, or do we need to develop more? If you were making a decision about, is Koreen the best candidate for a promotion, or is, of these 3 candidates that we are looking to hire, which one is the best match from a skill set perspective, then you do want more specific skill data about me as a person, about the skills that you care about. And that's where I usually recommend organizations use the least amount of data possible that they are comfortable to trust to make the decision they need to make. That high risk decisions, or risks that decisions that impact an individual person's career, livelihood, job, you want more accurate data. For broad looking, hey, sorry, L&D, but L&D investment is not as high risk of a goal. So you can have broader scope data. And this is where, like, inferring skills, which is a big trend right now. And there's almost every platform is starting to think about how do we help with skill inference, is low validity data, but a lot of it that can help you set some baselines around trajectory. And in the same way, there's a lot of task intelligence tools that are starting to say, based on this job description or this role, here's probably the tasks that role is responsible for. And then an organization can get 75, 80% of the way there, and they can start to modify and adjust as needed. But it doesn't need to be crazy making. You can put some general categories. Yeah.
So then let me ask a question. And this is just to try to help my little engineering brain. Take something like critical thinking. Would you consider critical thinking to be a skill, or is it the overarching umbrella over a set of sub skills that contribute to critical thinking?
I would say that is a category of, or a lens through which skills across multiple different areas of the business could contribute as evidence of critical thinking.
And now then the crazy making would be if you go too deep into those sub skills to say, hey, we have to define every sub skill and then assess to those sub skills. I mean, I suppose if you had the time and resources, you probably could, but really you just want to be directionally correct, or be correct enough to make a difference. And I would imagine also, again, I'm paraphrasing because it'll help me really understand this, identifying the high leverage skills, meaning certain skills that hey, they're useful in critical thinking. That same skill is also useful here, 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 and here. We're gonna dive deep into that, Whereas there might be some aspect of critical thinking, and I don't know this, but something else that's
Yeah.
really, it only helps in this narrow area. It might be nice to know that it exists, but we're not going to focus on that. We're going to focus on something else that has potential broader applications. Am I tracking with you?
You are. And I think one of the things that starts to fall apart when people go too far down a skills or tasks rabbit hole is the actual context of why that information is important. So if the end goal for an organization is we'd like to make our widgets faster, or we'd like to sell more widgets, or we want more people to know about our widgets, there's an actual end target goal and business metrics that we can look at to say, what are the skills that we think are needed to accomplish this goal rather than complete a task? It's the business context lens of skills that actually helps drive the value of having some of that data, and the correlation between skill and performance or hitting success metrics or milestones is actually where the value lies.
So then the next time someone comes to me and says, hey, we are on a journey, we want to become a skills-based organization, and we're looking for perhaps some help or assistance in doing that, I'm thinking my question should be, help me understand why. Like what are you trying to drive in the business?
Yeah.
What will becoming a quote skills-based organization, how will that serve the business? And then that a good answer to that question, if it occurs, then I think would help to clarify how deep do you go in what areas of so honestly, Koreen, this is really helpful, because I thought I was just going to be the jerk who doubted skills-based organization.
No. And in fact, if somebody came to me and said, we need to be a skills-based organization, I would ask them why. What business problem are you trying to solve? And how will skill data help you solve that problem?
Yeah.
Because this is a cultural shift for organizations. It is a multi-year journey. It is a transformation not only of your culture and your systems, but how people think about every aspect of how people work and their relationship to work. It has the opportunity to solve lots of different problems by having deeper insight into people. You can give more specific performance feedback. You can have more specific learning pathways and targets against career objectives or existing performance issues. You can hire more accurately for the skills that you feel like are missing within your organization. You can do succession planning. You can think about strategic workforce planning, not just in terms of where are pockets of people, but where are pockets of skills, and can we actually move. The pandemic was a real motivator for this. When work needed to suddenly change and organizations didn't know what skills existed across the organization, they didn't know where to tap into to say, can we actually leverage these folks? Because they're in this job, but right now that job is not as important as this other thing we need to do. Can we borrow them and help them? So there's lots of actual business use cases that can benefit from having deeper insight. But if an organization says to me, well, we just need to be skills-based because everyone's telling me that we need to, I would say, don't do it. Or don't do it yet. Like, wait until there's a business priority, something that's really tied to how your organization transforms and evolves for the future, is really the only reason to do this. Otherwise, it's an awful lot of work and an awful lot of detailed conversations that may not actually solve a real business need.
So I imagine before going on a skills-based journey in whatever area of the business you're looking to impact, I would imagine some of the fundamental work that has to be done first is related to like role clarity and accountability clarity. Like, what is the job? What is the job accountable for? What are the inputs and outputs of the job? And frankly, I am amazed that thing that we would assume, well, that's the role has got to be clear. You hired somebody for the job. You must know what they're accountable for. You must know what the expectations for the job are. Is it just me in my own little world where that's oftentimes not the case, or have you experienced lack of role clarity in the world that you've experienced?
Yeah, one of the exercises I often do when working with organizations early on in talking to them about skills is asking them how accurate their job descriptions are in describing the work that people are doing. And I've yet to have an organization come to me and say like, "Oh, our job descriptions are totally accurate." Everyone's job description is exactly what they do. Usually when I ask that question, everyone looks like a deer in the headlights. There's this panicked expression of like, "Oh no."
And then they quickly go to ChatGPT, create a job description for a role called ABC because Koreen's asking and I need to provide her something.
I cannot tell you how many organizations say, well, we had a job description and we needed to hire a different job, but we just copied and pasted most of it over and changed a couple things. Like we don't have good systems of record for work right now. The closest we have is probably buried somewhere in performance management systems where managers are talking directly to employees about projects and work and feedback, but none of that is captured in a way that we could look at it and say, what is this person doing? What has this person done for the last year, or what have they been working on? And because we don't have that data, there's a real challenge in becoming skill-based, because you're starting to ask questions around what's needed, and people don't necessarily have documentation or a source to say, here's the work that we're doing.
Yeah.
So there are some teams that are a little bit easier to unpack than others. Sales teams in general follow a lot of the same familiar patterns. Marketing teams divide work out in pretty consistent ways. Engineers. But if you ask a project manager, well, a project manager could be anything in any organization, depending on the work to be done. Yeah. So it really does depend on the organization, how much they understand or how quickly they could wrap their head around high-level work descriptions. But it's important. I mean, we're at a time where AI it's here. Companies are thinking about it. People are implementing it. And being able to talk about the human contribution to work in the balance with AI is going to drive a lot of conversations for the next several years. I think we're just at the beginning of these.
I think one of the things I've seen happen commonly recently is organizations stating that they're going to embrace AI or embrace AI plus human collaboration, and then encourage their employees to do exactly that, but not define it in a clear way. Not say, hey, here is productive and appropriate leveraging of AI and specific tools. And here's what we don't want you doing. Here's how we don't want AI replacing human qualities of our communication, human qualities or human insights from our data. AI, can crunch a lot of data, but sometimes a human looking at that data set will see things that AI won't see. Because I have a team that leverages AI quite a bit, and I consistently remind them that AI can't replace your insight. AI will it'll churn data, it can boost productivity, but don't forget that you own the output. You own, if you're developing a training course, you own that model. You own what that program is intended to do. You can use AI like a scalpel and help you develop certain things, but don't think that it's going to be an axe or a chainsaw and it's going to just make it tons easier because you aren't going to have to do any more hard work. But that's
you're talking on one of my biggest fears about AI and skills. This intersection is that in order for us as a society, I'm going to go big picture now, to work effectively with AI, it's our expertise that's informing the AI. I've trained a Koreen GPT. I've fed it both of my books and everything I've written for the last decade, and it has yet to produce something that, when I ask it to write something for me, it is yet to write something that I would click send on and claim as my own. I always have edits. I always am like, no, that's not quite right. And we are at risk, I think. I mean, even talking about preparing students for the world of work, and now AI is coming into the scene and is part of the mix. Human expertise is going to be the most important thing for us to focus on and value over this next decade as we evolve in figuring out how to use these new tools. And I don't know that we have good systems right now of consistently developing expertise, because my concern is that folks won't know any better and will just trust AI to be the expert. And for folks that are working with AI a lot right now, I mean, you just talked about it. I'm experiencing it. I use AI every day. It's not good enough. It's not an expert. And what I do, it can't give the insights and expertise. It's efficient in producing content quickly, but it doesn't have that layer. And so human expertise and how we develop it, I think, is our challenge for the next.
Absolutely. I also use AI. I've got a browser that is just off in the corner of my screen. It has 5 tabs: one for ChatGPT, one for Claude, one for Perplexity, and then a couple of others. And it's just there to remind me it's an available tool. And it might be once a day, twice a day, where I will go to the appropriate tool and I will leverage it. But it's always I tried to train ChatGPT to understand the concept of borderline humor, because in my writing, in my personal writing, I actively use borderline inappropriate humor. I come up to the line, I don't go over the line, and I use it as an attention grabber, as a, if you're developing a training program or you're writing a note to somebody and you want to grab attention, nothing grabs attention like someone coming up right up to the line with something, light humor that doesn't cross the line, but came close. I can't get ChatGPT to do anything close to that. So I will use it to crunch data, to do research for me, to, I get a great productivity boost. But anything that requires Dan Rust's human insight, human sensibility, human something, you have an instinct for that, and I just don't even try anymore to use it for that.
The complexity of how we make decisions and how we choose to interact with others, how we analyze really complex situations, how we imagine additional possibilities, none of those things are capabilities of AI. And if they ever become capabilities of AI, then we may be in trouble. But I don't see a future in which those things are the strengths of what AI can do for us. The strengths are process a lot of data quickly, synthesize information, be able to do readouts. Like, I use AI because it's helpful for me in my brainstorming and thinking and imagining how to talk about things. But also, you mentioned borderline humor. I use a lot of storytelling and personal examples of why is this relevant? How could this be used? I've read lots of AI examples. They're terrible and they are hollow because they're not real.
Right.
And so I think that's where, like, what are we building towards? And for all of us to fundamentally answer that question, are we building towards a future where we want AI to replace the work that we do? Or are we working towards a future where we want AI to help us focus on the things that make us uniquely human? And I would much rather have the latter than the former. So,
one of the downsides of having a really fantastic assistant or apprentice or intern is they start doing all of the hard work for you. And that's it feels great. Feels great.
Yeah.
If you have that, I had a boss years ago who was surrounded by great people. He had an assistant, he had an intern every year, a new fresh intern every year. He had people doing stuff, and it turns out you do that after 3 or 5 years, you lose something. You just couldn't count on him for answers. You couldn't count on him for doing much of anything. He was like the king not wearing clothes. And I worry about us if we start going to AI because rather than me think through this paragraph to a customer who's not happy, I'll have AI generate a first draft, and then I'll edit the first draft, and I'll make it mine. And I'm not saying that that's inherently wrong, but that's definitely easier. And you start to lose the ability to think through what needs to be included. Like put myself in the seat of the customer. What are they feeling right now, and what words do they need from me to help them think a different way or feel a different way? I had an experience, as I think you and I have talked about. I live in a rural area, and when we moved to this rural area with 10 acres of grassland that needs to be cut down for hay once a year. Well, one of the responsibilities that came with this is twice a year we spray it with an animal-friendly herbicide, so that when you end up with the hay has very few weeds, milkweeds, other things, but it's also animal safe. So this, when we first moved here a year and a half ago, it was my job. I was going to do this, and I had the sprayer, I had the equipment, I ordered the herbicide, but the instructions don't really tell you exactly how to dilute it, because the level of dilution depends upon the width of your sprayer, the gallons per minute of the spray. It depends on the speed of this. And so I sat in the machine shop for an hour doing what my grandfather used to call ciphering. I was doing the ciphering and I was working through, okay, what do I need to okay, how do I, and I captured my work, I wrote it all down, and I came to the right amount of dilution, and it worked. That was a year ago. Then this spring, I had become more familiar with ChatGPT, particularly ChatGPT on my phone, so it was very accessible. I hadn't saved my paperwork, bad on me. So I just went to ChatGPT and I said, hey, this is what I need to do. What information do you need to tell me what the dilution rate is? We figured it out in 10 seconds.
Yeah.
But I remember the difference in the feeling of a year ago. I had worked my brain, and it felt good in the way when you like exercise a muscle and it kind of hurts, but it's a good hurt. This felt so shallow. It felt like, okay, well, I'm glad I got the answer. But if I live like this too much, my brain's not going to do any of the hard work on anything. And I worry that may be what happens to us, where we stop doing the hard thinking, the hard work. I don't know. Does that prompt any thoughts?
It's a risk for adults, and I think it's also a risk for how we think about raising our kids in this age of AI. If they are growing up in a world where they can ask AI to answer any question for them, will they develop the muscle to have that satisfaction of learning, to have that satisfaction of accomplishment, to have that? We're really at a super big inflection point that I think gets lost in all of the technology innovation of who are we in this new world? Like, what is our role, and how are we intersecting? And I think because I've been working on skills data for 8 years and like thinking about the skills side, as AI has entered the public forum, because I've been building AI models behind the scenes for years. It just LLMs weren't publicly available yet. And so now everyone can interact. There's an interface for folks to interact with AI. And the potential is where a lot of people are focused of like, well, it can do this and it can do that, and we're not really examining the cost. And what is not the cost in terms of power, which is a big deal, and the cost in terms of like, but I don't think we're thinking about the cost of a societal shift to not having enough jobs for folks because technology has replaced people. And I don't think we're thinking about whole economies based on this transactional, I work and I make money. Well, what happens with AI? And back to your point, what happens to us and our brains? And if we're not challenged, and curiosity and critical thinking and all of the things that get us excited and passionate about life, if those start to be dulled because we're just not in there doing the work, it's a risk. I didn't want to end on this sad note. I think
no, but you're so right, and it's potentially profoundly debilitating if I'm a young person and I've not had to think hard.
Yeah.
But then there aren't a lot of jobs available that require me to think hard. Or the only jobs that are available are the ones that do require me to think hard. But
and then how do I get there? How do I learn how to think hard if I'm not challenged all along the way?
Yeah.
And I think that is what I am most nervous about. It is the thing that, I mean, being in this line of work and talking about future of work and skill development, and me very much focusing on the human side of the workforce.
Yeah.
And me also seeing, inevitably, because I love technology and I love what it can do for us, inevitably seeing a future in which we drive ourselves off a cliff. And for folks who study social media, and social media is has been great for a lot of things, and I've used it extensively and I love it. And we can also talk about the impact it's had on kids and like in the hands of people who will spread false information and all the things. Like, it's created different dynamics in our society because we've had these tools. I think AI is this next layer of what does it mean. So if I have a takeaway in this intersection of skills, it's for anybody who's in this space and who has influence, like thinking about the impact on society of the decisions we're making today will have ripple effects for decades. And that is, if we have a responsibility to be having these conversations about what do humans do? How do we measure it? How do we understand it? I love that insight. I want to use that information for good so that we can really examine this balance of AI and humans.
And it's advancing so rapidly. This isn't something for 2 decades from now, or even a decade from now.
Here.
I've been thinking lately about just 2030. Now, 2030 is 4 years from now. It's going to be 2030, 4 years from now. And
crazy,
you can
right?
imagine a very different world. We're going to be leading different kinds of people. The workforce is going to be younger, so I think, like I said at the beginning, when you and I were having the initial conversation, this podcast isn't necessarily always about, hey, here's the answer. I love the fact that we're just discussing the hard question, our hard questions. And I think this kind of dialogue is one that needs to ideally continue in a search for the answers. I just don't. Every time I start to talk about this kind of AI's impact on our own minds, AI's impact on our jobs, AI's impact on the skills required to create human value in the workplace. It's a massive issue, massive challenges. And I feel like the train is moving much more quickly down the tracks than we are thinking down the tracks.
I think that's true. And I think if there's one thing that I'm maybe optimistic about, it's that we do have the capability now to better understand human capabilities. We can
Yeah.
think about skills, we can measure skills, we can think about work to be done in different ways. All of the things that we said have been blind spots for a lot of organizations for a long time. We're starting to recognize that they're blind spots. And I hope in that recognition that having more information, skills, data, information about
Yeah.
people will help us map to how do we want to work with technology in
Yeah.
meaningful and productive ways. The moral kind of societal question is there are lots of things we could do. What are we choosing to do?
Yeah.
And I think that I look forward to lots of conversations about that. I think that there's people with different experiences than mine and different lenses that they look through. And I think it really will require everyone coming together and having those conversations.
And I think there's so much juice to this, Koreen. What I'd like to do, if it's okay with you, is sort of just decide at some point in the future, it may be months from now, after you've chewed on this more, I've chewed on this more. I'd like to come together again, and while we've covered a lot of ground on this podcast,
Yeah.
it feels like we just started to scratch the surface on the most important part, like on the juiciest part, and we're starting to get really interesting. But I want to be respectful of your time, and so we'll wrap this up. But we will, assuming you're okay with it,
Yeah.
we'll find the right place and time to peel the layers away even further, because you seem like the kind of person who is itching not just to say the house is on fire, but to actually find out, well, what kind of water buckets do we need to bring to address the house being on fire? So
I have some water buckets. I am willing to bring them. I do think the types of conversations that hopefully spark thinking, and that organizations, as they are thinking about these AI and skills transformations, that they're thinking about it through maybe just a broader lens than how do we increase our business profits, and right, that they're thinking about the more broadly, where are we going from a organization perspective.
Koreen, thank you. Fantastic conversation. We'll have more in the future.
Okay.
And don't forget, I'll include a link to your books. I'll include a link to information about you so people can follow up. But absolutely, if skills-based thinking, skills-based organizations is part of something that you are thinking about or caring about, definitely buy Koreen's book. So we'll include a link to that information.